Some people may think that claiming Sword Art Online is the worst anime is pretty bold, and in some ways I kind of agree, but I do think Sword Art Online has a pretty decent claim to the title, and here's why. There are tons of terrible shows that people watch just because they're bad, and there's probably even more shows that are forgettably terrible that people never even watched. But there's something significant about Sword Art Online that doesn't apply to those other two situations. For a shockingly large amount of time, it was one of the most popular anime being consumed. It's actually still the 6th most popular anime on my anime list, that ranking determined by total reviews on the site. And while it may seem its popularity is just a byproduct of maintained momentum from the 2010s, in 2020 Sword Art Online only had one of its 3 million reviews. Of those popular shows on my anime list, very few have such a negative reception. To find a show with a worse rating than SAO, you need to go down another 34 spots to the 40th most popular show, which is SAO Season 2. To find a worse ranking that isn't a sequel or a movie, you have to actually go down to the 60th spot, where finally Darling in Franxx is ranked below SAO, a show very controversial for reasons well beyond just being bad. So Sword Art Online is both popular and infamous, and stories that find themselves in that position are almost always worth trying to learn from, their circumstance often being a byproduct of clear mistakes, but also successes. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about the fascinating reign of Sword Art Online. If you weren't watching anime around 2012, you probably don't understand the full impact that Sword Art Online had on the medium, especially for casual viewers. However, as much as it is influential, it's also infamous. It's been criticized for its quality, poor writing decisions, and popularizing a now super oversaturated genre of isekai, specifically trash isekai. But why do people see it in such a negative light? What about this show is so disappointing? I think to fully understand that we need to jump back and look at one of the things it did right, because there is some nostalgia I have surrounding Sword Art Online, and I think it was popular for a reason. So let's look at the first 2 episodes, because I have this running theory that almost all hyper-popular shows are built around a fantastic pilot. And despite what you might think, Sword Art Online has a pretty strong start. A while back, I was making a video on when Sword Art Online really went off the rails, and I created this graph ranking each episode on a scale of 1 to 10 in 2 different categories: the quality and then how crazy it got. Standouts include when they introduced an AI daughter for our teenage protagonist. That was weird. Or that weird murder mystery where it ends with a ghost of someone that was killed that's never explained later in the story. And while the story gets really crazy, the first 2 episodes I rated pretty high in quality without any real crazy writing decisions. And the first episode of SAO is exactly what you'd expect from a hyper-popular anime. I know it's a meme at this point, but the premise of if you die in the game, you die in real life immediately sets clear stakes. They also roadmap the journey perfectly. There's 100 levels that you have to beat before you can get out of the game. It's no wonder me, a nerdy anime watcher, was fascinated by the idea of existing in a video game where your life is actually on the line, experiencing a fantasy adventure on incredibly familiar terms. Isekai, which in many cases is used as a form of escapism, fully utilizing video games, another common form of escapism, makes a lot of sense. And it's not just compelling, it's done pretty well. The first episode is a lot prettier than I remember. The story and characters have a chance at growing into something much more interesting, something I'll argue they failed to do later in this video. And the pacing doesn't drag, skipping large sums of time that feel unimportant and checking in at significant moments. I think in these first 2 episodes, I don't see Kirito as this generic self-insert character. Obviously, he's written to appeal to that dark, brooding loner archetype. But you know, that hasn't gone away. They introduce the premise, have some cool little character moments with Kirito and Klein, and deliver on some really hype scenes, which is what I'd argue Sword Art Online does the best, but only sometimes. It introduces Asuna, sets up some cooler moments down the line, and further separates Kirito as a loner, lining up with exactly what I would expect from a show like this. It initially did what it was trying to do pretty well. So I think that there's nothing in the first 2 episodes that solidify Sword Art Online as being a bad show, but it is the point where they introduce a couple ideas that exemplify why it became a bad show. Like the guy who dies because he refuses Kirito's potion, or Asuna's cloak breaking in a way that doesn't make sense in any video game logic, and then the mechanic is promptly forgotten for the rest of the show. There's definitely small holes that represent larger issues that are more prominent later in the story. But on the contrary, I think it represents literally the reason it was so popular and successful, despite its criticism that came later. When Sword Art Online does its best, I think it emulates the things that worked in the beginning. It does hype moments pretty well, the premise is still interesting, and they actually dip their toes into exploring it in a really cool way. Like in the second episode, there's this deep-seated distrust of beta testers because of the way they use the information they had to get themselves ahead. That's pretty cool, and then Kirito playing the villain to kind of dissuade that distrust is interesting too. That's the thing I keep coming back to with Sword Art Online. So much promise and so little delivery. There are lots of ideas in Sword Art Online that almost work, but that's part of the problem. Hope is what hurts the most. It's always hard when you struggle to categorize something clearly in your mind. Is a show good or bad? Is it worth the time, attention, and energy I'm giving it? People don't like being disappointed, so when a show has a strong start and fails to go where people want, it sucks. SAO is a show that feels like it slowly deflates. There's this interesting thing that happens on my anime list where often sequels for controversial shows have much better reviews because those who didn't like it stopped watching initially. Like I said earlier, Sword Art Online Season 2 has worse ratings than the original. And the crazy thing about Sword Art Online is that it still is kinda airing. They're still finding ways to wring out every little bit of content they can from it. And people still watch. Some fans just like it despite its flaws. But you'll notice this video spends a lot of time focusing on the first arc because I think by the 15th episode, the show has kind of fallen apart. And I'm sure there are people more qualified than me to talk about later seasons and movies. Part of the reason I think that this show is received in such a negative light is because it's been wrung for every little ounce of content it has. So let's just state it clearly. Why was Sword Art Online bad? The show failed to deliver on the hooks, ideas, and premises that made it so popular, occasionally exploring them in cool ways, giving a false sense of hope. Because some of the ideas were actually really cool. For example, what would it be like to live in a video game, establishing a new life of standards and norms, cut off from the rest of society with a group of thousands of people? How might someone react to that? To be put in a situation where your life was actually on the line. The 100+ levels set up such a clear guideline, and by the time they got to the end of the first arc and they were struggling to get past the 75th level, I thought that was so interesting. So when they cut that short with what I would consider to be a major failure of a twist, Sword Art Online gave up on all the good parts it had set up. The rules of the game don't actually make sense when you look at them closely. It essentially functions as a soft magic system, just being convenient when it makes sense. And that wouldn't be such a problem if the game weren't kind of the coolest part. The ending feels like it's filled with Deus Ex Machinas. Why does Kirito not die when he runs out of health? How does he even kill Kayaba? Why do they have no interesting answer as to why Kayaba did it when they have that conversation at the end? So when I asked that question at the beginning of this video of why was anime's worst show so popular, I think it ends up kind of being the inverse of one of anime's most popular shows ended up disappointing. Because I think the biggest problem with SAO was its failure to deliver. But to be truly let down means that some part of you wished it was better.